Start with that basic statement. And so that on everybody's scroll, whatever existed on earth, what was on that was for their good and for the good of others. Correct? Doesn't matter who lived. If their scroll was in alignment with God, it would be for good their good and for others good. And God's scroll that's on our lives is His will. And if we ask anything according to His will, He hears us.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
So I keep wondering if somehow not only our mandate got into the atmosphere, but if what we're asking God is not only for us to come in line with our mandate, but the people around us, you're, you're not really forcing your will on anyone else because you're asking for God's will in their lives. That can only be for good.
Yeah.
And therefore, if they come in alignment together, then good's going to happen because it's going to be God's will. And really, that's what we need to put a lot of pressure on when we talk about getting our mandate out into the atmosphere. It's the same with them, where we want it to come together to form arcs, where our wills, where it comes together, and only good can happen from that.
Yeah.
Morning.
So the thing is that anyone that you're dealing with, all you're looking at is really you're asking God to bring them into alignment with their will, where it involves you.
Yeah.
And only good can come from that. And would that not also put pressure on them through God, because you're praying God's perfect will? Come into alignment.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing when you administrate from your mountains and you use the laws, the kingdom things of keys of the kingdom, binding and loosing. And people often say, well, can you bind someone against their will? No, but you can bind someone to God's will and to their destiny, and you can administrate that. They still have a choice, but that pressure does put on them the opportunity to choose. And I think that's the key. It's a choice that they have, and there can be pressure, internal pressure, spiritual pressure, that their spirit will begin to put on their soul to begin to align themselves with God's will and God's purpose. So we can use the keys of the kingdom, it talks about there, to bind something. And to bind something is the good thing. People get that mixed up. They think it's a bad thing to get something bound. No, we bind something to God's will and God's purpose, like they bound phylacteries, the word, or on their foreheads and on their wrists, because they were coming into agreement. And that's what we're looking to do, see agreement. So, as you say, when two people are in connection and they come into agreement with one another, then their destinies are aligned and intersect. Because sometimes it might be we walk alongside people for a while, and sometimes we may intersect with them and have a one connection which changes something, where there's something's happened in that connection which has brought change and transformation to the situation. So absolutely, I think when we're looking at these things, we want our life to be in alignment with God's will, and ultimately that comes out when we receive a mandate which is in agreement with God's purpose for our life, our destiny, and then we outwork it. And if our hearts are aligned and He writes His will on our heart, then our heart will draw us towards it, and we will be one, at peace, rest. Because that's what rest is. It's not inactivity, it's just activity in a place of being at peace with it's God's will for our lives. Therefore, we don't strive, we don't have to struggle, we don't have to force the issue, we just outwork it in alignment with that. So we're at peace and rest even when we're very active, from a sense of we're not trying to make something happen, we're outworking what God has called us to do. So Romans 12:1 and 2 becomes a key part of that, in that it's a process where if we're going to know what His perfect will is, so we can serve or worship Him and outwork it, then we need to be not conformed to the world and transformed by the renewing of our mind so that we begin to think that way. because the world's way of thinking is not God's. God's thoughts are not the world's thoughts. And so if we're aligned with the world's thoughts, then we will try and outwork those things in our own strength and make something happen and force things to happen and control and manipulate people, which is what happens when you do things in the flesh to try and make God's will outwork. You manipulate and control others, because then you try and bring them into the order that you think is correct. And in essence, people can do that with a good motive, in the sense that they want people's best, but they do it in a fleshly way, which means that it's control and manipulation, and will never really bring about anything profitable. Flesh profits nothing, Jesus said. So we do have to look at how this works in the spirit, and it does create a culture of honor where we're looking to see someone's destiny fulfilled and to receive the best from them that we can, in the sense we receive them in the name of who they are. Like Jesus said, receive the prophet in the name of a prophet, you receive the prophet's reward. When we interact with people and we encourage them to be the person that God's created them to be and to fulfill the destiny he has given them, then we are honoring them and we receive the reward of them in that way. And when then we're in agreement, then there's an alignment and things start to outwork. And when, as you say, when we begin to release our destiny, our mandates, and we start to see people connect with them, then change can take place both ways, because it's discipleship is a two-way street. And when I'm aligned with somebody, they're aligned with me, and we both benefit, and then that can be outworked. But it is, it's one that we have to make sure we don't do in the flesh. But in the spirit, there's an exponential increase when two people come together in the realm of the spirit. You get a multiplication times 10, whereas when you come together 1 + 1 in the flesh, then you only have what those two people have in their own strength, rather than what God is in the midst. Because when we come together, he's in the midst, he says, and therefore that's where the exponential increase comes from God being the third person between two to release the fullness of his government into it. And that's the difference. When you have 1 + 1, you're only going to get 2. But actually, when God's there, there's an increase which is much greater than is possible when we do things even together, but in the flesh. So, yeah, that's good. Yeah. Oh, you're muted there. Hang on. Yeah, okay. Yeah, go on.
If I am in God's will, the mandate is released from me into the atmosphere around me in my mountains, okay? Yep. Which draws the kingdom of heaven around that to fulfill that. That's where I don't have to work it out. God works it out through circumstances, whatever. So when I come into your path, let's say, and we cross connect, and it's on your scroll and my scroll where we're to connect and whatever, if the mandate is released from just me of what would affect the two of us, that would probably put such pressure that it would somewhat activate their scroll, whether they realized it or not, if it was God's will, so that what God intended would happen. We'd form an ark and come together to bring the kingdom of God to happen on earth.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's definitely how it will work. And I think a lot of people don't realize what happens when they come together and connect with somebody else, because they're not necessarily spiritually aware or tuned into it. What happens when an arc forms? The arc is just two things coming together at such a point that electricity can cross between the two and make a spark. So we have to get close enough for that spark to take place, but actually one person may not be aware, because the spark may form in the other one. If you think about it, if one person is carrying, let's say, the energy of that scroll and the life of it and the power of it, and another person comes close enough to form a connection where that spark can jump, then the other person will actually be energized by that, which will kickstart what they do. Yeah, and I think that's something that we should do intentionally as well, in that we should be looking to empower others by blessing them. So them coming across our lives, we're looking to bless them. Abraham's covenant mandate was to be a blessing to every family of the earth. Now, that has been twisted, obviously, to control and therefore to manipulate things. But when it's done properly, our whole purpose is to be a blessing to others, and blessing means to empower them to prosper and succeed according to their mandate, their scroll, not ours. So ours is to prosper them, and then they can prosper us and others. And discipleship obviously is giving that away continually, always from a new governmental perspective, always releasing people to be able to do that for themselves, not that you become the mediator of that, or the one who they look to continually. Because when we encourage them, then they should be able to look to God, because that's the point, is that we can all engage God for ourselves. So if we can inspire people, then that will inspire them to hear God for themselves, and then they're ongoingly be able to outwork their destiny in the same way, and then give that away to others. Because we're always empowering people to prosper according to their destiny and their scroll, not ours. And that's the difference between a top-down structure. People are empowered, but they're empowered to bless somebody else. The person who is empowering them, they want to be blessed by those that they're things, whereas that isn't necessarily the motive when we come to give things away. But it can be a consequence. When we continue in relationship with other, it becomes mutually beneficial, and we help encourage each other grow and mature and create, because creativity comes together when what we carry is released to each other. Information that we release forms that arc. So when we share something and someone else receives it, an arc forms, and then that information has the power to bring change and transformation. And there's sort of a creativity that happens when people come together. Those sparks of creativity, we call it that. It's because when someone says something, it has the ability to spark something in me to increase and enhance what they've said, and then that process can go back and forth.
Mike, for a city of refuge, one further step. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Am I on? Okay. For a city of refuge. So then, just taking it one other further step, it's when a collection, an ecclesia comes together, they've received their mandate together, different parts of it which come together, which is then released, which does the same thing again. And it's just the mandate of God being released from us as a collective together in the different parts, which creates the city of refuge, which brings the kingdom of God around us. So it starts happening.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly what happens. That's why it's important to have a blueprint that you can release, and that blueprint empowers people to be drawn to it as the kingdom is manifested and the government is manifested through it. And a lot of what we've been taught to do is to go and try and make something happen, rather than see God's kingdom, the government of God, established, and then that outworks and things happen as a result of that. And even in a sense, go into all the world and preach the gospel. Make disciples. In that sense, make disciples is a sense where we have adopted techniques and methodologies of doing that rather than actually carrying the light, being the light, demonstrating the light, and therefore the light drawing people to us in whatever sphere we're living, whether it's Jerusalem or Judea or Samaria or the ends of the earth. There's a sense where what we carry in terms of the government of God and the kingdom enables the manifestation of that wherever we are, and that is what will draw people. When the mountain of the house of the Lord is raised above everything else so people can see it, then people will come streaming to it, it says, and they'll be asking, teach us how you're doing these things. Teach us how this place is a place of safety and health and wholeness and provision when we can't provide that in our own environments. So yeah, we essentially corporately, carry something that individually is exponentially increased. So that's why it's important that we are together, one heart and one mind, in unity of heart and purpose. And then you'll find that different people within that have different functions and roles, and a whole city functions with many different people needing to be involved. You can't have everyone being electricians or power managers. Some people need to be managing the food, some people need to be managing infrastructure, some people need to be managing different things. In any look at a normal city, you see all the things that go on to make that city function well. And in a city of refuge or an embassy of heaven, it's going to be the same. And it may be the 7 mountains that you have, or other mountain spheres that you use to establish the government in that city, which will be different from other places because you will have different blueprints. They may look different, but they'll function according to the same principles. And I think what you're sharing is about those principles, where we don't have to try and figure it all out and make it all happen. We just need to get assured that we're in alignment and agreement with our scroll, and the mandates we're given on a daily basis are outworked, and then God will connect everything else up. But it is a different mindset and a different way of doing things that the old order doesn't really follow, because of the nature of their government and the way in which people direct other people rather than people directing people to hear God for themselves. And therefore the old system ends up being mediatorial and codependent or dependent on others for the outworking of that, rather than mutually interdependent. And that's what you're talking about, a mutual submission to one another, because that's what it talks about in Ephesians chapter 5, submitting to one another. And what we're submitting is how my destiny can interact with your destiny so that it can be multiplied and increased, because there's no end to the increase of his government. But that's very different from how we try and build things from a natural perspective, using the ways in which the world does it, which is usually stepping on someone else to get ahead. Where in the kingdom we actually offer to be something that people can stand on and be a supportive structure that can help them go higher and further than we have. And then they can do the same for us, and then we all continue to increase in the kingdom.
And that's why every individual, every part is as important as the other part, because if all the parts are under one person or several people, it plugs up even the least from releasing the mandate God put on them through them to fulfill the overall mandate.
Yeah,
it can't happen.
Well, that's it. Yeah. And I think that obviously the way in which people view things, they view them from an earthly perspective of something is more important than someone else, usually because they're seen the most. You know, often people put a priority or importance on people. Well, they're seen, they're the prominent people, therefore we like to be around them. You know, significant others, you know, is a factor in how people do things, and the church is full of that. People want to be around you because of your position, and if you're a prominent position, then they actually want to be around you more. You know, and that's obviously not how God's kingdom works at all. And very, very clearly, we have to enable people to engage God for themselves. And when you look at the even in Corinthians, where it talks about the body, you know, it actually says, you know, the bits that are hidden actually are way more important than the bits that are seen. You know, in a sense, because not in value, but sometimes just because something is seen on the surface doesn't actually make it more important than something that goes on the inside. I think that's what it's really trying to say. And if you actually think about it, you know, you could chop off my finger and I might struggle to be able to do certain things with my hand, but if you take out my kidneys or my heart, I'm really going to struggle. You know, so some of the things that are internal and some of the roles that people play are really key roles in what we do, but they don't necessarily are the things that are seen by others. But we tend to value those things which are on the surface rather than those things that go on underneath. And those are the relational connections and the things, the infrastructure of things that we have that make things function. You know, but in reality, without everybody fulfilling their role, then the body doesn't fully function. And if you take that into whether that be in a local ecclesia, you know, the general consensus is either 10 to 20% do all the work for the other 80 to 90, you know, because people are not encouraged to be fulfilling their purpose. Now, sometimes that is deliberate in that people keep everything to themselves, and sometimes it's the opposite. People just don't want to bother, so they're quite happy for people to do it for them. You know, but in reality, all of us have a part to play. And when it comes to a city of refuge environment, that will become really, really important, that people see the importance of their role. You know, the problem is we tend to put a monetary value on people's roles, and therefore people value things on a basis of what it's worth in financial terms. And that, in a sense, creates a problem. You know, and I don't believe that when we establish a kingdom perspective and a kingdom government on earth, it is going to be based on finances in that way. So we have to look at it being based on people fulfilling their role. You know, and you know, I remember this, you know, in some films, you know, Star Trek films, you know, I like Star Trek and scientific films, science fiction films, but in there's no money. No one gets paid for doing their job in Starfleet. And they might be an engineer, or they might be a security officer, or they might be a communications officer, or they may be the doctor, or they may be the captain, or the first officer, all those things, the helm officer, but no one gets paid. They do it because they're fulfilling their role within Starfleet. You know, and so there was a sort of concept there which was trying to remove from it that people were competing with one another for financial gain. They were all looking to fulfill their purpose, to make the whole thing function well. And that's actually what will need to take place if we're going to function in a city of refuge in that way. You know, so it's an interesting one when you begin to look at how we work together, how we interact, what are the dynamics that are in place between people, and how, you know, government functions, because we must make sure we establish foundational government that always releases people. As much as that is not how it worked in the past, it must be how we do things in the future, which will mean having a different view. And the foundational role doesn't make it any more it doesn't make it any more valuable. Because what's the point of a foundation with nothing built on it? You have to have something established on the foundation. So is the foundation more valuable than what's built on it? No, it's equally valuable, and that's the point. You know, to have a fully functioning thing, everything is equally valuable with different roles, different responsibilities, but none of them actually seen as more important than anyone else. You know, it's no point having a bench of 3 and a bench of 7 if there's no one connected to that they can benefit from and influence and encourage. You know, so it's all about everybody actually finding their place within God's blueprint and within their destiny interactions. And I think that's why it's so important to have the right people connected. Because if someone is connected and their destiny is not in that place or in that blueprint, then they're always going to be a square peg, and they're only round holes, you know. And that's the problem, because God will have all the shaped holes to fit all the shaped pegs that He creates, and actually they're all uniquely shaped, you know, because God makes us all different. But He's made a place where our shape fits perfectly with everyone else. You know, so.
I just wanted to comment on something you said. I've watched Star Trek for many, many years and love Star Trek. I just love all the Star Trek. You know, when the new ones come out, I just get so excited, you know, just to see how they create the cosmos and just the things that they do. I just love it. But I had never seen it in that perspective before, where no one got paid. Like I never thought about that aspect of it, where no one got paid and they just did what they did. But if you think about it, all their survival depend on each other,
yeah,
to do the job that they were called to do. So that's very interesting. I recognized some things today.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to comment on, I was listening to someone, Ian actually, and he was saying, you know, was talking about what needs to be done in the future and so on and so forth in the order of Melchizedek. And he said something, he said, what's it going to take to do what God wants to do on the earth? And then he answered the question by saying money. And something kind of was cross-haired with me regarding that, because I didn't kind of agree with that, because maybe in our current stage we might need money, but I think if we look at where God wants to take us, it's not going to be, because money is corrupt anyway, it's not going to be money. I think when you're pulling things out of the atmosphere that's needed, you know, when there's a different kind of energy. See, when you have money, someone controls that money, and it doesn't take too long for that money to filter up to the top person. I guess if you have kingdom people handling it, it's different. It's a different scenario if those people are really kingdom people. But my point is that where God wants to take us, I don't see that money is going to be that keen factor, because it'll be, as sons, we probably will learn to get what we need from the environment, the food to grow, the energy that we need, everything that we need would be coming from the environment. And I think maybe gold in terms of its conductivity for practical purposes, but not gold to have just as a currency. Anyway, does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think when you look at finances, money, it's obviously a huge issue, and you know, there's a lot of catchphrases like "money makes the world go round" and all those type of things, which I think are not kingdom perspectives. I have no issue with money. Money in itself is neutral. It's not good or bad. It's what you use it for makes it good or bad. And money can corrupt, as power can corrupt, as position can corrupt. Lots of things can be corrupted. Money in itself is is talked a lot about in the Bible, and it's obviously talked about a lot from a perspective of being generous and giving and various things. I personally believe that rather than thinking about money, we should be thinking about wealth and prosperity and being blessed, which is being empowered to prosper and succeed, irrespective of whether you've got physical money. You have the empowerment to succeed and fulfill your destiny. And if that requires some finances, then those finances, the treasury room of heaven, will release that. But we're in a position of transition between old and new. I believe cities of refuge will not necessarily need to operate on financial systems in the way in which the world operates now. And if the financial systems, which are generally paper or electronic transfers, collapse, then what will people use? You know, if everyone is working together, then actually you won't need anything in terms, because you will supply each other's needs. And that's why you see the bigger society picture of a city of refuge or an embassy of heaven. The currency of heaven is not money. In a sense, you could say it's love, or you could say it's God's glory, or whatever. I mean, in a sense. But ultimately, if everyone was working for the common good of God's kingdom, then what I do benefits somebody else, and what someone else benefits me, and therefore we're all mutually benefiting one another. If we have a farmer who's producing food, and we have someone else who's producing power, then those benefit one another. And we don't have to do it in a bartering trade manner, because the kingdom will govern everyone being looked after. And that's what you see in the early church. No one had need.
Yeah, if you think about it, when Jesus needed fish to feed the people, and somebody provided a little fish, bread, loaves and fish, and then he multiplied it. I actually, think in the king, yeah, I actually agree with that, because maybe in the transitional times money might be needed, but maybe I'm looking a little bit further, because Jesus did provide anything that was needed. And when you think of a monetary system, it supposes that some people are more important than other people. So some people will end up having more money, and I think the way God thinks about it, well, maybe I can't go there, because some people get paid more than others, but in our monetary system, it really supposes that some people's work is more valuable than others, even if somebody's a kidney and somebody's a finger.
Absolutely, because in our system, those that are in control get the money. They get the most money because they are seen as the people who keep everything else going. Now, you can see there's an element of truth to something when someone starts a business, and that business employs people. They get the profit of the business because they're the owners of the business, and you see, okay, there's a sense of profit in that because of what they're doing. And it's like we tend to look at things from a worldly perspective. That's our thing. And if you look at the Bible, obviously the Bible did have people having jobs, whatever, but he also had a jubilee system that returned everyone's inheritance to them, so people were not dependent on serving others, in a way. So there was a restoration of things back to where everyone had something of their own, that God had their inheritance, and they used it to fulfill and enable them to outwork their purpose, their life. The key is, in it all, is motive. And the motive is that we are blessed to be a blessing. That is the motive. 2 Corinthians 9:8 says, God is able to make all grace abound, so that always, in every situation, we will have more than enough for all our needs and an abundance for every good deed. And that's the key. God, seek first the kingdom and everything else will be added. Anything that we have more than what we need is to bless others. Now that would be very difficult in our current climate and situation, because we're, in a sense, doing what the Bible also says in things to, you know, have an inheritance for your children or your grandchildren, and, you know, have something to pass on and things like that. There's, you know, there's a thing there which is given for current situations, not necessary future ones. You know, and that's our problem. We tend to look at where we are and where we've been, and the Bible addresses those periods of time in certain ways, but then addresses other periods of time in different ways. And we must be prepared to move with the progressive sense of the revelation that God releases. You know, and there are lots of teaching stuff out there, you know, tithes and offerings and giving and teruma and all that sort of stuff. And I've listened to some of it, you know, and I've taught some of it in the past, because that was the place we were in the past, you know, in tithes and offerings and giving, whatever. When we mature, it's a question of asking God what he wants us to do, like we do for everything else. Not be restricted by a set of rules that give us a guidance and a guideline. You know, 10% in the old covenant was a guideline. You know, and it was a sense where that was what represented. There was a purpose behind that, because there was one part of the nation who didn't actually have any land. The priests, you know, they didn't have any land. You know, they were there to serve in the priesthood, you know, the Levites. So they didn't have land. So the tithes and the offerings were given so they could actually serve. So, you know, the 10 parts of 10% or whatever it was, tithe, was given so that they could actually serve the rest. So the rest were just actually enabling them to serve them. So they were all mutually working together in that sense. But of course that got corrupted, and in Jesus' day, you know, the whole thing was a corrupt system where they were making people buy their offerings and buy their doves and in the temple, and have temple money, which was an exchange, so that they could only pay their temple tax with temple money, and that it was just this whole system. Because after they returned from the exile, the whole system of the tithe for the nation didn't really operate in the same way. So they had to come up with another system to pay the priests, which actually meant they got corrupt. You know, so everything changed. And in everything, if we carry the "I'm blessed to be a blessing," that does mean that God wants to meet all my needs. He does not want me to be in need. If I seek first the kingdom, then I trust him to meet all my needs. But he also wants to give me more than just my needs, so I can be a blessing to others. And then if we see the church in fullness, the church is to be a blessing to the world. Every city of refuge or embassy of heaven is to be a blessing to the community in which it's in. So we can provide food and health and everything else that's needed, whether that come naturally, that we grow, and we have even that, we can have supernatural crops, and we can have, like the tree of life, crops that are always in season, you know, every month of the year, you know, or we multiply, you know, we have supernatural provision to multiply. There may well be a need for different things, and new energy sources that aren't required on the grid. If the grid collapsed, what would we do for energy? Well, there are things that God has already prepared for us to go and find to enable us to fulfill those things. But again, they will be to bless everybody, not to make money. And unfortunately, what you see in even in Christian entrepreneurial things, it's a desire to make money. And I know some people say, well, I'm called to make money for the kingdom. Great, if that's what you feel mandated to do. But generally, you know, people like that still give 10% and keep the 90. Whereas if you're called to make money for the kingdom, I would see that you probably better giving the 90 and keeping the 10, because God's provision would be there. So you know, there is a potential for those things to get corrupted because of people and people's stuff in their own lives, you know. So I personally, when it comes to kingdom finances, you know, I've gone through various ways of thinking about it, in terms of the covenant, you know, in terms of tithing, in terms of Abraham being, you know, who gave, you know, outside of the law, and so giving is absolutely the essential thing for the kingdom, because God so loved the world, he gave. So giving is an expression of love, and God wants us all to be generous and to be givers. And you clearly see in the New Testament there was an expectation of giving so that everyone wouldn't have any needs. You know, that was how they saw it. No one had any needs, so people sold property and land and things like that and gave so that everyone was blessed. You know, and that was the attitude that they had. Now, over the years, that sort of attitude has in somewhat got changed, and I think the attitude that we will need in the future will be different. And I do believe a lot of the whole financial thing is potentially corruptible. I do agree with you in that. You know, and you have to really examine the motives of your heart in financial things, because it's a test. You know, where's my trust? If God asked me to give everything away, would I do it? If I trusted him, yeah, because I know he would meet all my needs. But it comes down to the acid test of, would I do it? In theory, oh yes. When it comes in practice, would I? Would I be able to trust him? Have I developed a relationship that's enabling me to trust him at that level financially? And, you know, there is a sense of giving and blessing and honoring and all those things, and I have no issue with that in where we are right now. I do believe it will be different in the future. And so I believe we will be operating differently.
I actually had a very vivid dream about something like that, Mike, where I was involved. There was a storm, like a very big storm, and it was made up of like sand, like a sandstorm, but it came in different shapes and sizes, and they kept getting bigger and bigger. One was a horse, one was an airplane, but it was like a vicious, and it just kept buzzing and buzzing, and it was a very scary thing. And at the end of the storms, the different storms that came through, there was a situation where the entire atmosphere changed, and out of the atmosphere started manifesting all kinds of beautiful pottery and different things you would just reach out, or I guess with intention, and these things would just form. It was amazing that what I was seeing was in the form of beautiful pottery, but I knew it represented more than that. And like different people were there, and they were just looking and saying, "Oh my goodness, this is beautiful!" And these things were just manifesting. You would reach out with intention, and something would just form. So I kind of held that close to my heart for a while, and that's what I feel that would happen, you know, after this whole current chaos that's happening right now.
Yeah, yeah, I think that we will see things change. I mean, I think you cannot have an embassy of heaven operating under worldly, governmental, financial, health perspectives. It's got to be a heavenly kingdom perspective. And there are certain principles that works. Sowing and reaping is a principle of the kingdom, but it's not just about finances. It's a much bigger principle than just money. It was made into something about money, where actually the principle of sowing and reaping within the whole kingdom is, you know, and you get sort of the whole trading thing out of that, comes out of that sort of principle, has been, I think, turned into a financial thing again by what's going on with some of the trading things. I think the Teruma teaching, personally, I've looked at that whole teaching. I don't believe that is a new covenant teaching, because there are no rabbis. You know, those who are going around calling themselves rabbis and looking for people to give them teruma, to me, that is something which was an old covenant thing that happened in the days where Jesus was around. That yes, there were rabbis, and yes, they did have teruma, and this were the sort of 40th or whatever it was, and a first fruits thing. And if someone chooses to give someone something because God inspires them to do it, that's great. And I'm not opposed to people giving, and people are very generous, and people have blessed me in many different ways, financially, in other ways, and I bless other people, and I have no problem with that whatsoever, as God inspires. I don't believe there are any earthly priests, and I don't believe there are any earthly rabbis. You know, Jesus is our ultimate teacher, and I want to honor him rather than trying to honor somebody else because they are saying that giving me money will bless you. And I've, heard it, because when the teruma stuff started to come around, it was like, oh, we've started doing teruma and see all this blessing that's around now, as if that was a confirmation of it. So I personally, I don't actually believe that teruma is a now process, because I don't believe we should be looking to earthly rabbis. We all need to look to God. And that's the whole point. Everything of the new order is about everyone looking to God for themselves, not going through somebody else. So a rabbi is another mediator. And I just don't believe that that is what God wants in his kingdom. It's about mutual honor and respect and mutually being submitted to one another in relationship. It's not about putting people in positions where financially we give. So, I really am not really, I would never look to do a trading thing. If someone wanted to do it, great, that's up to them. But I'm not really looking for a trading thing. If people want to trade because God tells them to, then that is great. And if they want to do that, that's fine. But I wouldn't want to try and get them to see that by giving money that they're going to get that revelation. They won't. The money won't give them the revelation. The practice and the getting the revelation for themselves directly from God will get the revelation. Otherwise, all you're getting is information. So people are trading on information in reality because they're putting a value on it. So if I give some money, am I going to get the revelation just because I gave the money? Well, that totally simplifies the process. And if all it is about giving money, well, I might as well give a whole load of money and get all the revelation now. It will never come through giving the money. Money and giving and trading is only showing a desire of the heart. And it's the desire of the heart to pursue something and engage it and embrace it and outwork it that will actually produce the fruit of it in our lives. And if someone's desire is, hey, I want to show this by honoring this, by giving some money as a sign that my heart is towards this, and if that's what God inspires them to do, fine, I've got no problem if God inspires people to do it. But when I went to a place and they said, well, we're going to put a trading basket up the front and everything else, and I actually said, look, please can you put it at the back? If you want to do it at the back, because I don't want people being distracted by a whole lot of people coming up to the front and throwing money in a basket. And I don't, because people are not going to hear what I'm saying. And I'd rather, if someone did want to do that, that they waited until the end, and then if they really did want to do that, then go ahead, you know. And it stopped all the chaos of, you know, disruption going on and everything else. Now, if people want to do that and people want to, that's fine. It's up to them. I just don't feel, for me and what we do not encourage it because we don't believe it's a now thing. You know, I don't believe Teruma is a now principle. I certainly looked at it and looked at the whole thing and thought, okay. But when I went back to God with it, I had no confirmation in my spirit. I was only going because other people had taught it. And I thought, well, those people are part of what God's doing today. It must be okay. And actually, when I went back to him himself, I didn't feel it was okay. Certainly for us, and we're not encouraging that. You know, that's not to say that we don't encourage people to give. We do, because I do believe sowing into something can produce fruit. You know, because but it's a motive of the heart thing, not a formula. You know, and you know, if you sow into our ministry, then it will enable our ministry to do things that we couldn't do otherwise, possibly. But that's so we can bless others. You know, that's the point. You know, we want to bless others in such a way that they can then bless others, and they can bless others. And so, you know, I do believe in sowing and reaping, but I just don't believe in the way in which it's been taught only to mean certain things. When it comes to finances, that's for sure. But you know, these things are ongoing, and you know, we tend to encourage people to ask God what you should give. You know, whether something or nothing. You know, and it's obviously you need mature people who are willing to ask with the right motive, with the desire to give, because God loves a cheerful giver. You know, you can't go and ask him, oh God, what should I give, hoping that he's going to ask you to give less, because that would be an indication of where your heart is. You know, so it's got to be a desire that God would show me so that I can give in accordance to that and be blessed by giving and bless others by giving. But it's a heart issue. You know, and so when we stop teaching tithing, some people stop giving because it was almost, oh, I'm free now, I don't have to give. You know, as if it was a tax imposed upon them in the first place, which it wasn't. And I would question those that don't then give, whether the motives of their heart were right in the first place, whether they were giving out of fear, and now they're not giving out of fear, they don't feel they have to give. And it's not, no one has to give, but it should be a desire all of us have to want to bless others and to give offerings, whether that be of our time or our finances or anything else. We should be givers because God is a giver. You know, that's really what it's about, the generosity of God and his heart. We should be like that. And if we're not, then we have to deal with why we're not. You know, and that might be because of our poverty mentality. It may be because we're orphans. It may be because we operate in fear. It may be because we don't trust God for our finances and we see that we have to meet our own financial needs. It may be that we feel, well, I can't give, I won't have enough. You know, none of those are valid reasons. You know, we should give if God says give, and we shouldn't give if he doesn't. You know, and not be manipulated by anybody, but be genuinely open to ask God, truly wanting to hear what he says. You know, and I've talked to people here, actually, some of them, who the attitude really when you got down underneath it was, well, I hope God doesn't ask me to give more than a tithe. You know, and it's just like, well, where does that come from? You know, where does that attitude come from? It must come from something out of fear somewhere. You know, and are you actually ever going to hear God correctly if you come with a motive, an agenda which is biased? you know, because we all tend to hear what we like God to say, you know, unless we're really open for what He does want to say. So it's quite interesting, these things. And, you know, we're going to, you know, have to address the whole issue of giving from a kingdom perspective at some stage to try and help people to engage in God's system of finances or blessing in whatever way going forward. You know, and it will be a huge challenge to people. Let's say in a city of refuge, let's say that there is no payment for anything. I mean, if that's the case, it will challenge people's perception of value, worth, you know, attitudes to, well, why should I do that if I'm not getting anything? But when you look at the bigger picture, everyone will have all their needs met because everyone else is giving their lives into fulfilling their part within the bigger picture.
That's good, Mike. Thank you.
So
and
I'm
then
sure,
we'll get what they need, basically.
Yeah.
And everyone will receive what they need.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure I'll ruffle a few feathers by sharing some of that stuff on finances because it goes counter to the trends that are out there. But, you know, an attitude that says, well, how are we going to, you know, see the kingdom? We need money. Will be somebody who actually needs to get money. You know, and you know, you go back to a couple of years ago when all the big thing was the dinar and the, you know, Iraqi dinar and the exchange, and how all this money was sewn in and we're going to get billions of pounds out of it and all this stuff because we're buying up dinars and all those things. Where is it? You know, where is the great re-exchange rate and everyone making billions in the kingdom, which was being encouraged by the same people? You know, they were encouraging people to buy certain things because that is why God was going to actually provide. You know, and we had it here, and people were going around encouraging people. I looked at it and thought, no, this is just another scam. You know, it's just like other scams that I'd seen in the past. You know, and actually got caught up in a couple of them, thinking, wow, this must be a kingdom way, and God is doing this and inspiring this. And actually, it wasn't at all. It was a scam. You know, and I do believe some of those financial things, and it's all talking about, you know, as if insider trading and all that stuff is nonsense. Absolute nonsense. And now, where is it? You know, it's not there, and because the kingdom isn't about money. How are we going to fulfill God's? It isn't about money. It's about His government.
Mike, the financial system is so corrupt.
Yeah.
I remember what Margaret Thatcher said: socialism is great till you run out of other people's money. And I guess that's what's going to happen shortly, because most of the central banks are going broke. And I think, well, with Britain coming out of the European Union, it started a sort of string of dominoes that are going to fall. And the whole financial system, the whole monetary system will have to be sort of exchanged for a new one. So that's where I think the church is, the ecclesia. I remember Lance Wallner used to say that we need to influence the financial mountain, but it's the most corrupt. It's like thousands of years of demonic trading there, and everybody who goes into that gets corrupt themselves. I think the time is going to come where we do everything without money. I mean, that sounds like utopia, but eventually the motivation of one's heart is, well, why are we doing things?
Yeah, I agree. And I do feel that the Seven Mountain thing about redeeming the cultures of the world, I just don't resonate with it at all. I resonate with the fact that yes, there are mountains, and there are mountains of culture, but actually we're there to present kingdom culture, and therefore we need to see the mountain of the house of the Lord raised up above all those mountains. Then they will come to the mountain of the house of the Lord to look for the answers that they're not going to find in their own systems. No matter what system there is out there, it has not got the answer. Only God's kingdom has the answer. And I know it sounds great to, oh, well, we're going to influence the media, and we're going to influence the entertainment system, we're going to influence this system, we're going to influence that, the financial system, and we need to, bring righteousness and justice into it. It all sounds great until you realize that they're all man-made. And when, and I think, people say, well, no, God made those in the first place. I don't believe he did. There's only been one kingdom. There isn't 7 of them. There's one kingdom that has governmental aspects to it, and I certainly do not believe that we should be putting our effort into propping up or influencing something that's going to collapse anyway. Because Hebrews 12 makes it really clear. Everything that can be shaken will be shaken. Only thing that will remain is that which can't be shaken, which is God's kingdom, which is why we need to build on a solid foundation of God's kingdom. And I'm not saying people shouldn't be salt and light in their workplaces, in their community, and they should be demonstrating the kingdom, and they should be showing a different attitude, showing what it is really like to trust God and not be trusting in man in that sense. And certainly we should be demonstrating, be salt and light in the communities in which we live and everything. I'm not saying we should abandon the world, but we just need to demonstrate the light, the true light, and people will recognize the quality of that light, that it's reflecting something from heaven rather than from earth. And I think it very clearly says that all the other hills, which are all symbols of authority, are going to come to the mountain of the house of the Lord. We just have to get lifted up. We just have to get raised up into the right place, above everything else, in position of government to bring blessing, and that's the purpose, to bring blessing. Obviously it's not going to happen instantaneously. We're not suddenly going to not need money tomorrow, because we live in a world where it does require money to buy things and to pay for things and everything else. That's where we have to now change the values of how we view people, of how we view things, how we view areas. And then when we change the values, then when we then need new ways of doing things, the value systems will be in place to enable those things to take place. You can't just say, okay, we're doing away with money tomorrow. Well, you'd have a problem with paying your taxes and everything else, because Jesus did say we should pay our taxes. So there's a sense where at the moment those taxes are required. There may become a time when that government collapses and the whole tax system collapses and the financial system collapses, and there's no requirement to pay it because they're not giving any services in return because they don't exist anymore. They've collapsed. That might come about, and therefore you may not then need to pay tax, and therefore you wouldn't need money. But what is money? And that's what you look at. What is actually money? Because in the old covenant, they didn't bring coins originally. They brought their tithe of their produce. So they bartered their produce for other things that other people produced, and the whole economy was based on mutually sharing and bartering and exchange. It was exchanging one thing for another. And so they gave a tithe of their mint and their dill, as Jesus said, everything they grew. But eventually they took on a system where that became financial, and it became a coinage, if you like, that when it really began to get corrupt. And there's nothing more corrupt than charging people usury to come and buy temple tax coins at a premium and you could only pay your temple tax with a coin that they paid. They charged you extra for. So, you know, the whole system at that point was totally corrupt, which is why Jesus overturned the money changers' tables. That was why there were money changers' tables in the temple courts, because they were using it to make money, you know. And he obviously turned it over and called it a den of thieves and challenged it several times. So.
But I think that was much better than the standard they have now, when money is created out of thin air, you know.
Oh, yeah. In a sense, yes, there was some value behind it, you know, because it was usually gold or silver, and so the money itself had some value. And then, of course, they then had the gold standard, in which the paper money we had was backed up by the value of the gold that we held in our gold reserves. And then that all got undone, and now they're trying to restore some of it, because essentially it's like, you know, we have financial issues, and our Bank of England, who controls the finances in the UK, you know, they were now talking about, you know, this easement process. We're going to print up a whole load more money, and we haven't got anything to back it up, you know, because we sold all our gold off, majority of it. So it is just printing paper, you know. So yeah, all those systems ultimately, I don't believe are going to be what we use when we're in a city of refuge or an embassy heaven. We're not going to use those systems. You know, I've never seen anyone paid anything in heaven. You know, so you know, if we're seeing a heavenly system, it may be different.
Or in Star Trek.
Or in Star Trek, no. Yes, it's God's own program. So, you know. But yeah, you know, but we have to realize we are in transition, and we've got to be willing to look at the values behind everything before some of the actual practicalities change. Because if we try and change things without having changed the values behind them, it won't work. Because it will be people will struggle, because they won't know how to use the government that they have to produce all the needs, meet all the needs they have by seeking first the kingdom. You know, people won't know how to multiply food, or to have perpetual crops, or to have oil that never runs out and you keep filling pots. You know, I mean, we have biblical precedent for a lot of these things. You know, it's there. When you look into the Word, you can see where some of these things took place. You know, and you know, Jesus multiplying the food is obviously, you know, a major one, but you have the pot of oil that never ran out, and you know, all those things. And we have to be open to seeing current versions of that. You know, and you know, and that's where we need to actually be legislating and bringing government into our spheres, so that we can function according to heaven's government and not earthly government, and therefore we will be able to function in a different mindset and view in how we do some of these things. You know, but it is a challenge, and we're going to have to learn to change our value system, change how we think, not be conformed to the world system, but we have our minds renewed to begin to think a different way, so that we can outwork the kingdom in a different way. And everyone's where they are, you know. People are where they are right now, and some people are viewing, well, we need money, therefore we're going to put our effort into getting money, and it's money that's going to enable us to bring all those things into place. Okay, well, if that's where they are, that's where they are. I would rather be looking at values.
I think people, you're right there, Mike. People are doing the best that they know how to do, and what they see, and I'm sure, especially in this current movement, so to speak, that they're doing the best that they know, and it's a matter of just changing the thinking a little bit. Yeah. So that's why when I heard that, I thought, okay, you know, yeah, maybe think a little bit, even though in the short term, how short that is, I don't know, that we will still need money, but if we always think money, that's what we will always aspire to. So if we shift the thinking a little bit and think kingdom principles, where Jesus multiplied the loaves and fish, where he found the gold, got the gold coin from the fish's mouth to pay the taxes. I'm sure there's a lot more. The oil, the widow's oil, that was before Jesus, but it was, yeah. If we think that way, then that's, at least we can move in that direction after money.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also had Jesus challenging the perspective on value and worth, in that he paid everyone equal wages irrespective of how long they worked in the day, and that challenged the thinking. That's not fair. And Jesus said, well, I can choose to pay whatever I like. But what he did was he paid everyone the same, whether they worked for an hour in that day or the whole day. Now, people perspective was highly challenged because everything is based on a fairness system based on how we operate in the world. And Jesus was indicating that his way of doing things may be different, that everyone's of equal value, and it's up to him to assign that value, not for us. And that I think that would be an interesting thing to pursue and meditate on, and look at what does that look like from a City of Refuge perspective. What was he indicating there? Was he what was the purpose behind telling that parable? And obviously there's multi-layers of that. And again, you have those that come into the kingdom in the last minutes of their life, and you've got those who come into the kingdom as a child, and how does that work? Well, God lets them in. It's not on the basis of because it isn't on performance or earning it, is it? We haven't earned our salvation by what we've done, and we may have been faithful to God all our lives. But is that any more value to God than someone's life who gave their commitment on their deathbed? It challenges, a lot of these things challenges our perspectives on how we value things and how we view those things, and therefore what we do with it. And it is a challenge, and I'm not saying that I haven't been challenged by it, or I'm in the process of being challenged by looking at things from a different perspective, and having my preconceived ideas of where they came from changed and challenged. And of course we don't like challenge. It's almost like, because, well, that means I have to admit I'm wrong. And that's the problem. We see things in right and wrong terms, and therefore if this is right, then I must have been wrong, rather than it's just a change of mind and viewing things from a different perspective. Now I have further revelation. I wasn't wrong in the past. I did things on the basis of the revelation I had. That revelation has changed, so now I change the way I do things. So I don't value it on, oh, I must have been wrong, then I feel bad. And all these things, I think, sort of get outworked in a new value system. And there is so much difference in the whole value system of the kingdom, and looking at it. I'm going to be doing some sessions soon on new and old, and how we look at the new and old, and how that works, and what is a new way and what's an old way, and it will come into new values, and these type of things will have to sort of be part of it, because it is a complete new value system.
I wanted to go back to what Norma said, where people in this new wineskin are trying to do the best they can do. I think it goes back to giving. It goes back to the very beginning. If anything with what's happening now in this new wineskin, it's going in, and like we talked about, getting your own revelation. And the problem is we're taking people that we're putting up on pedestal, we're following that, doing what we think we should do, following it, and then there tends to be a herd mentality that follows behind it, rather than individually on every single thing. Get it? You can listen to it, but if you follow it, you become part of the box. You're back in the box where you came from. You have to always go back and get your own revelation, or it's meaningless. Because otherwise I'm just operating on knowledge that I've heard. And that's the problem we have now. We're doing the same thing we've always done. We go in, we hear, then we follow. rather than going in and getting our own revelation, and that whole herd mentality follows behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that perspective, because if you have information, however good that information is, and it may well be based on someone else's revelation, it is still second-hand information which cannot become revelation until you go and engage God yourself. Totally true. And so many people are following the conference circuit, getting more and more information, and not necessarily revelation, because they don't go back and get it for themselves. You know, I love the Bereans. You know, they went to see if this was so. They checked it out and went to go and embrace it themselves. They didn't go and say, well, I want to disprove this, and that's an evangelical spirit, which is of equally wrong in a sense. But I don't think it's a good thing just to accept what anyone said without actually engaging, which is why I try and do activations as part of the teaching I do, so it gives people an opportunity to embrace it and find out in their own experience what it means to them. And if nothing happens, then park it. You know, I would hate to think that people were listening to what I do and not going back to God and making it their own. Otherwise, it's just information. You know, it may be revelation to me, but it's not revelation to someone else until it's part of their lives, which takes discipline to go back and engage, and takes us away from the culture and system of, you know, impartation by laying on our hands and someone else doing it for us. You know, it must be our own personal relationship with God that develops that for ourselves in the way God wants to interact with us. So it's great, you know, Ian Clayton would get a revelation from God about gateways. Awesome revelation, absolutely, definitely from heaven. And then he brings the teaching out, which is great, and people can listen to that teaching. But if you just listen to it and you don't apply it, and you don't learn to engage your own gateways, and you don't learn to go and find out, well, what's going on in your own life, then it's just information, really interesting information, correct information, but not transformatory information until you actually use it. You know, and I honor that diagram and what he's done, but when I teach it from my own personal experience, and then I encourage people to get their own personal experience, because it becomes a principle that you can engage in and find out those things for yourself. Then it's real to the person. If all they do is just listen to us teach and share things and don't go away and do it, then, you know, it doesn't work. You know, and you know, Ian Clayton's teaching is very practical as well. A lot of it is like, well, go away and practice this. You know, go away and do this. If you don't do it, then it's not going to be something that's going to benefit you. But I'm not convinced that that's what's going on the majority of times when people go to conferences and get the information. Are they, you know, and I know Ian Clayton talks about it a lot. You go to the next conference and, well, how did it work out in the meantime? Well, I've come to the next one because it didn't work out in the meantime. So didn't do anything with it, you know, and that will never work, you know. And that's, you know, it is an important thing to always encourage people to go back to God, have a personal encounter, a personal revelation, and then their experience becomes their personal testimony. And without a personal testimony, all you have is telling stories about somebody else. You know, and that's never ever going to work effectively in what God wants, you know. So anyway, we'll leave it there.